Thank you, Pete. Rob, thank you all. Please be seated. Well, President Reagan and Nancy, Barbara and I are just delighted to be here on this 11th anniversary of your election as president. My special greeting, of course, to your fellow Californians, President and Mrs. Nixon, also President and Mrs. Ford, President and Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Johnson, you're so sweet to be here, members of the Reagan, Kennedy, Johnson, and Roosevelt families. As I listened to these talks, I got to thinking, wouldn't Fred Travalena, Rich Little, Dana Carvey have a wonderful time here today? And I was so moved by Chuck Heston's opening comments, and Lod Cook, congratulations, sir. Once again, you've stepped up and done a superb job. Reverend Don Mumaw, thank you, sir, for the invocation, and of course, being with my trusted advisor, military leader Colin Powell, is a treat. And then deja vu as Sergeant Alvy Powell sang the Star-Spangled Banner. He did that at my inauguration, and I'll never forget it. Ambassador Annenberg and all who work so hard on this library, our profound thanks to you. This marks an historic occasion. For the first time, 5 presidents and 6 first ladies, past and present, have gathered together in the same locale. The 4 former presidents, dedicated public servants, and these wonderful first ladies, each has played a significant part in the American story. We begin with the 37th President, Richard Nixon, and the woman we know and love as Pat. Mr. President, you were an innovator at home, a peacemaker, groundbreaker abroad. We'll never forget it. Here, too, are Betty Ford and America's 38th President, Gerald Ford. To this son of Michigan, we say, we are very grateful for your quiet strength of character, your vigor, and your just plain innate decency. And next, we thank the 39th President, Jimmy Carter, and his wife, Rosalind. America applauds your lifelong commitment, sir, to peace, to human rights, to helping others. And it was most gracious of you to make such an extra effort to be here today. And I feel very badly that you haven't met a Democratic president yet, but please don't do anything about that. And Lady Bird, Mrs. Johnson, we salute you for your dedication to our natural beauty and also for your love of family that shines through every single day. Today we're here to honor an American life, which is the title of his autobiography. We also honor an American original. Ronald Reagan was born on February 6th, but his heart is the 4th of July. And with his disarming sense of humor, President Reagan was something refreshingly different in Washington. A politician who was funny on purpose. And he also was, though, a visionary, a crusader, a prophet in his time. He was a political prophet, leading the tide toward conservatism. He was also a Main Street prophet. He understood that America is great because of what we are, not what we have. And politics can be cruel, can be mean and ugly and uncivil. And unfailingly, Ronald Reagan was strong and gentle, and he ennobled public service. He embodied the American character. He came from the heart of America geographically and culturally. Not even a bullet from the gun of a would-be assassin could stay his spirit. I remember the terrible day in March of '81. He looked at the doctors in the emergency room and said, "I hope you're all Republicans." Well, Republicans or Democrats, his courage and humor made us all proud to be Americans. And for 8 years, I was very proud to be his vice president. And I saw a man who was thoughtful, sentimental, sending money to strangers who touched him, writing letters on yellow legal paper and asking that they be retyped because he wanted to make it easier for the recipients to read. As president, Ronald Reagan was unmoved by the vagaries of intellectual fashion. He treasured values that last, values that endure. And I speak of patriotism and civility and generosity and kindness, values etched in the American character. Once asked who he admired most in history, he simply responded, "The man from Galilee." Mr. President, your faith is what is true and good, and that helped reaffirm our faith in the United States of America. Ronald Reagan believed in returning power to the people, and so he helped the private sector create more than 16 million jobs. He sought to enlarge opportunity, not government, so he lowered taxes and spending and cut inflation and helped create the longest peacetime boom in American history. How ironic that the oldest president of the United States would prove as young as the American spirit. Here as in Washington, he was aided by the true love of his life. As First Lady, Nancy championed the Foster Grandparents Program, heightened breast cancer awareness. She refurbished the White House with the dignity that is her legacy. She sure left us a nice, cozy place to live, I might say. And to the scourge of drugs, she urged America's children to just say no. And Nancy, for these things and many more, all Americans salute you. And finally, the president was a global prophet. Today we've heard this, but the world is safer because he believed that we who are free to live our dreams have a duty to support those who dream of living free. He predicted that communism would land in the dustbin of history, and history proved him right. And he knew that when it comes to national defense, finishing second means finishing last. And so he practiced what he preached, supporting a strong military and pioneering the Strategic Defense Initiative. And his vision paid off. And his vision paid off for every American in the sea and sands of the Gulf, and America thanks him for that too. Mr. President, history will record the 1980s were not only among America's finest hours, they became perhaps democracy's finest era. Our friend the Iron Lady, as usual, said it best. I speak of Margaret Thatcher, your fellow liegeman of liberty. Recently, she spoke of how great leaders are summed up in a sentence. Here's a quote. Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. He had little help, at least that's what he tells me. And looking here at men and women from presidencies of the last 3 decades, it occurs to me that help came largely from the American people and you. And here's part of what the historians will say of Ronald Reagan. He was the great communicator and also the great liberator. From Normandy to Moscow, from Berlin to the Oval Office, no leader since Churchill used words so effectively to help freedom unchain our world. You were prophet and president, and I want to thank you for your many, many kindnesses to Barbara and to me. You love this country, you know America, and you have blessed America as few men ever have. And now it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and to all the other distinguished speakers who hold that exalted title. You know, I've been called, as just recently also, a great communicator, but I have to admit it's hard for me to communicate the emotions that crowd in at such a moment and the humility that comes with tributes like those you've heard this morning. The pride I feel as I look out over this audience and see so many old friends for whom this library is a testimonial of love, loyalty, and idealism, to Lod Cook and the members of the Reagan Library Foundation, and to the thousands of donors the world over whose generosity is reflected in the building we dedicate this morning. There are no words to convey adequately the gratitude that both Nancy and I feel for all you have done. And let me also thank President Bush and the former presidents who have joined us today. The exclusive fraternity of presidents has grown. And although we don't get together very often, when we do, well, as you can see, it generates quite a bit of interest. At one time or another, I've run against most of these gentlemen, and they've run against me. And yet here we are, which just goes to show that above personal ideologies and party politics, we stand united as Americans. I am proud and honored that so many of the great presidential families are represented here today. The descendants of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for whom I cast my first 4 votes, and who has served as a personal inspiration to me, as well as millions of Americans. Carolyn and John Kennedy, Jr., through their strength and courage, have so proudly carried forward the flame of their father's legacy. Lady Bird Johnson, whose warmth and strength served as a tremendous source of inspiration to her husband, and whose personal efforts have inspired a whole new generation of Americans to keep America beautiful. She's joined by her daughter, Lucy Johnson Turpin, and Lucy's husband, Eon Turpin. The 5 presidents on this platform span 22 years of challenge and triumph, from the first man on the moon to the last aggressor out of liberated Kuwait. 2.5 decades forever stamped with the style and substance of a grocer's son from Yorba Linda, California, who as a boy heard train whistles in the night and dreamed of traveling to distant places, and who as president would crisscross the globe to build a new and lasting structure of peace, and his lovely wife, Pat, whose splendor and grace has served as an inspiration to every first lady that has followed her. An All-American from Michigan by way of Capitol Hill, who has an embodiment of Midwestern decency and honor, steered the ship of state through rough waters and won the affection of Americans everywhere. And his First Lady, Betty, who has been a shining example of personal strength to millions of Americans. A son of the South whose election did more than anything else to restore that great region to its rightful place in the American mainstream, and who devoted himself tirelessly to cleaning the blood of Abraham from the sands of the Middle East. And his partner to the president, Rosalind, who assists him to this day in his important efforts to improve the quality of life in nations around the world. And a Texan imbued with the can-do optimism of that larger-than-life place, who in liberating a small nation half a world away, has also freed the United States of America from the crippling legacy of Vietnam. And with us today, America's First Lady, Barbara, whose personal campaign for literacy has opened the minds and hearts of so many Americans. and of course, my Nancy. I don't know how to begin to describe what she means to me, except to say I can't imagine life without her. Would you please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in expressing our gratitude to these great Americans, not just for their presence here today, but for their historic contributions to a world where, to a greater extent than ever before in our century, no one wields a sword and no one drags a chain. Together we gather for a single purpose: to give to the American people in the world a presidential library. There is understandably a great temptation to look back, to remember, to share warm and fond memories, and to reflect on the events which brought us here. And as we do, I hope we do not unduly focus on one man, one political party, or even one country. Instead, our focus should be on the enduring fundamental principles of life that ennoble mankind. Ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, presidents have built libraries, and amidst the surroundings that have shaped their characters and molded their values. From West Branch, Iowa, to the Simi Valley of California, these institutions reflect the genius of the American people for self-government. Within their walls are housed millions of records for scholarly interpretation, along with thousands of objects that give both solid and symbolic substance to this nation's highest office, and to the 40 men who have occupied it since Washington took his oath. Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future. It is said that after leaving the White House, Harry Truman once came into his living room to discover his wife Bess tossing their old love letters into the fireplace. "Think of history," said a horrified Mr. Truman. "I have," said Bess. Well, in a few days, more than 6 million pages of documentation pertaining to my administration will be released to the public. In time, more than 50 million pages will be made available for researchers. But if the Reagan Library is anything like its counterparts, most of those who enter these doors will not be academics. No, they will be ordinary people of all ages, backgrounds, and political persuasions, eager to examine their past and explore a history not always learned in school. For them, this institution will be a time capsule of American growth and greatness, covering more than a single presidency, honoring more than a single president. Here, visitors will have a chance to tour and study at their leisure the accelerating changes in a fast-forward world. They will be able to trace the historic process by which mankind has stepped back from the narrow window ledge of mutually assured destruction. They will observe an American president and a Soviet leader sitting in a boathouse on the shore of Lake Geneva, striving to banish the nuclear nightmare from the dreams of all our children. They will see tears of pride from the boys of Pointe du Hoc. They will hear the trusting engines of Challenger lifting off on a heartbreaking final mission. They will be introduced to a warm and selfless First Lady who reached out to a generation of young Americans threatened by the scourge of drugs, and who put a comforting arm around an older generation through the Foster Grandparents Program. They'll catch the sinister crackle of a would-be assassin's weapon, one that forever changed the lives of Jim and Sarah Brady, while reconfirming my belief that whatever time remained to me was to be spent in service to the American people and in accord with the Lord's wishes. No doubt many visitors will stand in the replica of my Oval Office. Perhaps they will sense a little of the loneliness that comes with decision-making on a global scale, or the stabbing pain inflicted by a terrorist bomb half a world away, or the dread sound of a telephone in the middle of the night with news of hostile actions. They will also feel some of the immense pride that comes to any president in that office as he comes into daily contact with the American heroes whose faith in themselves, their mission, and their mandate is a never-ending source of emotional renewal. But then I was lucky. If I ever tired, all I had to do was look over my shoulder. Age has its privileges. And on this day of memory and reflection, I hope you will indulge me in recalling some very special people. I remember a small woman with auburn hair and unquenchable optimism. Her name was Nellie Reagan, and she believed with all her heart that there was no such thing as accidents in this life. Everything was part of God's plan. If something went wrong, you didn't wring your hands, you rolled up your sleeves. And I remember a storytelling salesman with the Irish gift of laughter and a certain American restlessness. In the spirit of his forebears, who had settled on the endless sea of grass that was the Illinois prairie before the turn of the century, Jack Reagan took his family to many new beginnings. Perhaps that was the root of my belief, shared with Thomas Paine, that we Americans of all people were uniquely equipped to begin the world over. Jack had dreams, Nellie had drive. The Reagans of Dixon, Illinois may have had a little in material terms, but we were emotionally wealthy beyond imagination, for we were Americans, young people in a young land with the best days ahead, and we were part of a very special extended family. I grew up in a town where everyone cared about one another because everyone knew one another, not as statistics in a government program, but as neighbors in need. Is that nostalgic? I don't think so. I think it is still what sets this nation apart from every other nation on the face of the earth. Our neighbors were never ashamed to kneel in prayer to their Maker, nor were they ever embarrassed to feel a lump in their throat when Old Glory passed by. No one in Dixon, Illinois ever burned a flag, and no one in Dixon would have tolerated it. Something else I learned, and that every generation of young Americans must discover for themselves. I learned to admire the entrepreneurial spirit of this pioneering land, where everyone has a chance to push out the boundaries of life. All this and more will greet visitors to this library and museum. If they're anything like me, they will arrive with a conviction so reminiscent of what Nellie Reagan taught long ago in Dixon, that America itself is no accident of geography or political science, but part of God's plan to preserve and extend the sacred fire of human liberty. I, too, have been described as an undying optimist, always seeing a glass half full when some see it as half empty. And yes, it's true. I always see the sunny side of life. And that's not just because I've been blessed by achieving so many of my dreams. My optimism comes not just from my strong faith in God, but from my strong and enduring faith in man. In my 80 years, I prefer to call that the 41st anniversary of my 39th birthday, I've seen what men can do for each other and do to each other. I've seen war and peace, feast and famine, depression and prosperity, sickness and health. I've seen the depths of suffering and the peaks of triumph. And I know in my heart that man is good, that what is right will always eventually triumph, and that there is purpose and worth to each and every life. A dynamic people, by rolling their sleeves up and getting government off their backs, can achieve economic renewal. They can slay the beast of inflation and break the record book when it comes to sustained economic growth. They can create millions of new jobs and show a watching world the success of free enterprise. I remember a time when the growth of American government seemed inexorable, and the encroachment of that government on the lives and liberties of our citizens seemed unstoppable. I also remember a time when America was advised to keep a low profile in the world, as if by hunkering down and muzzling her deepest beliefs, she might avoid foreign criticism and placate her enemies. And I remember a time when walls divided nations and human rights were trampled in the name of corrupt ideologies. A time when the arms race was spiraling out of control and distrust stood between us. 80 years is a long time to live, and yet within the course of only a few short years, I have seen the world turn upside down and conventional wisdom utterly disproved. Visitors to this mountaintop will see a great jagged chunk of that Berlin Wall, as you've been told already, hated symbol of, yes, an evil empire that spied on and lied to its citizens, denying them their freedom, their bread, even their faith. Well, today, that wall exists only in museums, souvenir collections, and the memories of a people no longer oppressed. It is also a reminder that a strong America is always desirable and necessary in our world. Today, a heroic people has cast off the chains of Marx and Lenin that gave rise to so much of this century's tensions. The Iron Curtain has rusted away. In churches and schools, in factories and on farms, the people of Eastern Europe have found their voice, and with it a battering ram to knock down the walls of tyranny. Totalitarianism is melting like snow. As the mythology of communism melts under the fierce heat of truth, our greatest enemy now may be complacency itself. Meanwhile, let us joyously invade our former opponents with Yankee ingenuity, entrepreneurs selling their wares, enthusiastic tourists, all spreading the gospel of human freedom. Prosperous democracies don't declare war on each other. They simply let their citizens build better lives for themselves. Western Europe soared like a phoenix from the ashes of World War II. So can Eastern Europe from the ruins of totalitarianism. And the American people can help show the way. What a happy challenge for those looking for something to do after the Cold War. Today is the latest chapter in a story that began a quarter century ago when the people of California entrusted me with the stewardship of their dreams. The latest, but far from the last. For 10 years after we summoned America to a new beginning, we are beginning still. Every day brings fresh challenges and opportunities to match. With each sunrise, we are reminded that millions of our citizens have yet to share in the abundance of American prosperity. Many languish in neighborhoods bereft of hope. Still others hesitate to venture out on the streets for fear of criminal violence. Can't we pledge ourselves to a new beginning for them? Around the world, hope stirs in the Middle East, and our prayers are with the peacemakers as they strive to realize an historic opportunity to bring peace to that ancient cradle of faith. With the Cold War over, can't we achieve a new beginning wherever peace is threatened? Proverbially, old men plant trees, even though they do not expect to see their fruition. And so it is with presidents. The doors of this library are open now, and all are welcome. The judgment of history is left to you, the people. I have no fears of that, for we have done our best. And so I say, come and learn from it. My fondest hope is that Americans will travel the road extending forward from the arch of experience, never forgetting our heroic origins, never failing to seek divine guidance as we march boldly, bravely into a future limited only by our capacity to dream. May every day be a new beginning, and every dawn bring us closer to that shining city upon a hill. Thank you. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Our purpose in coming together today is to present the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library to the American people. I said a moment ago that the library will serve as a tribute to the accomplishments of the Reagan administration, and so it will. But this wonderful facility will also serve as a resource for all who wish to come here and study and reflect on the meaning of government and the historic events of the 1980s. The Reagan Library has been designed and built for the scholars, the historians, biographers, and writers who will come here to absorb the facts about the Reagan years and interpret them to the nation and to the world. But the library is more than simply a center for study and research. It will also be a living testimonial to a great president and the nation he led through 2 terms of office. As such, the library is really forever American. The tourists, the school kids, all the people. Their interests were at the heart of the Reagan presidency, and their curiosity and desire for knowledge will be served here too. And so we come to a special moment, the dedication of the Ronald Reagan Library to its ultimate owners, the people of America. Today, in effect, we give the library to the National Archives and to the citizens of our great nation. As a symbolic gesture of this handing over the keys to the people, I would like to invite Don Wilson, the Archivist of the United States, to come forward. President Reagan, would you also please join me in presenting the key of the library to Dr. Wilson, and through him to all of the American people.
There you are.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Stand by.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, oh, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time to stand and say,